Good morning to everybody. This is Stefano Mazarin Geopolitics from Italy. Today we will have our roundtable. We are trying to make it monthly. Today we have a special guest that we already had yesterday, so it's like a return. So it's Ken Hughes from News for TOF. You have like the two links of the two channels in the description, so please subscribe to his channel. Today we will have all the other guests that are coming a little bit like not in time, and the idea is like to make a roundtable about 1 hour and a half maximum, just to make it a little bit more fluent. Today we will have, just to say in advance, history legends, News for FOF that we have already can, and New World Econ from Canada, and War in Ukraine. The other channels we will have in the next roundtable in December, because Damned History, it's actually in holiday in Korea, so it's like 2 a.m. And it was a difficult time. And also Defense Politics Asia, now it's like night in Singapore, so it was like not the good timing to start the roundtable. We are trying to reach the best connection, but we are like all in the different part of the globe, so it's a little bit difficult. So let's start with Ken till we are waiting for War in Ukraine and the others coming. So thank you for being here. Let's starting to return to the discussion of yesterday. I have like some updates from to discuss about it. It's from the history of study of war. So it's about the actual situation in Kiev, that actually it's a very spectral situation, because Kiev, it's mainly without electricity. And so like the pictures of today, I will try to share later, but it's a city we completely without lights. And there is the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces struck residential buildings, thermal power plants, and substation in the city of Kiev, as well in Kiev, Vinnytsia, Lvov, Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And also Ukrainian, Russian, and social media sources claimed that Russian forces also struck target in Ivano-Frankivsk, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Kherkasy, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Poltava, Kivorad, and Kharkiv Oblast. So mainly everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, it was a general strike. Yeah. It was a general missile strike. So, yeah.
And the other interesting thing that I tried to translate, and then I will show it to you, but for me it's a little bit still shocking. It's like that prominent Russian politicians continue to promote openly genocidal rhetoric against Ukraine. What does it mean? This is a special case. The Moscow City Duma deputy and pro-Kremlin journalist Andrei Medvedev posted a long rant on his Telegram channel that I will show you later, where, let's say, he categorically denied the existence of a Ukrainian nation, relegating the Ukrainian identity to a political orientation. This is something that it's repeating in the Russian propaganda. Let's say that everybody can have a position about the war, let's say military security and whatever, but if you don't recognize completely the existence of Ukraine as a nation, okay, I think that it's impossible to start a discussion, because I don't recognize you. Wait a second. And Ken, if you want to say something about it, and I will return immediately.
Oh, sure. So fundamentally, from a geopolitical standpoint, if you don't recognize a country's right to exist, then how does one actually start discourse with that country? Fundamentally, you just can't do that. I mean, you have to, at least at the very base, you have to understand that a country exists. beyond that, if you're not willing to do that, then there's nobody to talk to. It's just that it's not complicated. It's just a matter of saying, hey, if we don't say that there is a Ukraine, there's nobody that you can actually talk to about stopping the war. So I some of these tactics I see coming out of Russia, or certainly it's not Russia. This is a Russian media, and the Russian media are very much maximalist. They're very much extremists. I would say even beyond maximalist, because this is more in the realm of extremism. Saying that a country doesn't exist when it obviously does. Saying that they don't have a right to exist, or saying that they I don't know. I find it to be it's obviously not effective, because there's no way to stop a war when you start thinking like this, when you start saying to yourself, well, this is how we're going to view things. And I just think that fundamentally something that Russia is going to have to, their propaganda machine, I understand the propaganda machine has its reasons. It has its ideologies, and its ideologies are very much an extremist point. They're wanting to push this narrative that Russia has to win at all costs. But I think when you look at that in totality, I think you see that there's no net gain to that. Their audience is dropping off. They're losing the support of the people. When you start to see all that and you put it kind of together, you realize that that's not going to. It's not helping anyone. It hasn't helped them yet. It hasn't helped them in 8 months, or 9 months, and it certainly doesn't look like it's going to give them any help anytime soon. So I'm not sure where the thought process comes from the producers of RT, where they sit there and think, well, this is still effective tactic. It's not. Hello? Oh, your mic is off.
Yes, sorry. Let me show you a little bit super fast, like the declaration of this journalist, because I'm uploading now. It's very interesting, because if I can read it to you, it's like I've repeatedly said that by and large that Ukrainian nation does not exist. It's a political orientation. To be a Ukrainian, one does not even have to speak the Ukrainian language. Okay, Ukrainian are Russians who have been convinced that they are special, more European, more racial and poor, and more correct Russian. The whole history of Ukrainian nationalism grew precisely from the thesis that are about right and wrong Russians. So if I can let a little bit this phrase on the screen, it's interesting that the main thing that it's starting from this theory of the union of the Free Slavic Republic. I will return back to the PowerPoint that I showed also yesterday. I studied a lot like the period between 1986 and 1991, and it was very interesting that let's say the Russian elite at that time wanted to create, let's call it like Soviet Union 2, version 2, without Central Asia. So partly it's made because Belarus and Russia, it's in a union, technically. So the only pieces that was missing to this project was technically Ukraine. And that in a sort of way, it could be very interesting also for the, let's say, the Slavic Union project, especially for the population, because like 40 millions of people in for a country like Russian Federation that is like declining in democracy, it's like it's a good deal if you think about it. And not only about military security and the grain, the production, because actually I think that in the last decade, Russia economically, especially about agriculture, import and export, it's completely independent about agriculture production. Before was very, very dependent from Ukraine. And for me, it's very stressful to think that the Russian propaganda is still pushing to this point that Ukrainians are Russians. So it's still like pointing to this that the Ukraine it's doomed by this government that is, let's say, technically not Ukrainians but Galicians. So
I'm
let's call them Polish nationalist people that are like actually in the government of Ukraine. And
so let's look from a historical perspective. We look from a historical perspective. They've been, fundamentally they've been their own ideology, if you will, for 1,000 years. So as far as being a nation, I think I want to say it was probably 1917 or something like that, or even before. As far as our own nation, let's say their own borders being called Ukraine, something like that, 100 years. But let's just go back historically again as an ideology, as a different culture, 1,000 years. If you ask me, that would be a moot and irrelevant point, because you have several million people who have delineated a border that has existed, we know for a fact, for 100 years, and they have been on their own for 30 years or however long. They've been on their own separately, certainly been called Ukraine for 100 years. So if you put all these in perspective, you kind of look at yourself and say, what does that matter when you want to argue, well, they didn't exist? But they do. They do fundamentally exist. They are fundamentally fighting you. They are fundamentally, they have fundamentally been working as a separate government from you for 30 years at minimum, since the fall of the Soviet Union. So at this point in time, trying to debate that, to me it seems like just throwing Jello at the wall and trying to see if what'll stick, because it's a middle. They are fighting you, so there is no impetus anywhere except for inside Russia to make this somehow want to actually work, because nobody else is buying that. That's the kicker. Nobody else is going to buy this ideology. Certainly, no one in the Near Eastern areas, where you have Chechens and you have all these different nations that have kind of formed over the past 20 years, 30 years. They're not going to buy that, because they all want to have a right to exist. The Middle East is going to have a fundamental argument because they want to have a right. Everybody wants to have a right to exist. So for you to say, well, but Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist, you take away the wind out of other people's sails to say that they have a right to exist. And I just think it's really just a silly argument. It's like it's trying to argue reality with books and saying, well, books are more important. No, reality is what's happening. And what's happening is you have a very real war on your hand with a people that have called themselves Ukraine. They're going to call themselves Ukraine. They're not going to stop, which I think that's probably the best part of this, is when you see what they try to throw at the wall, and you kind of look at it and go, oh yeah, that's definitely the kicker. That's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is definitely going to work. Like, no, it's not. It's not going to. Like, they have tried. Russia has tried so many different things, and none of it has stuck, because fundamentally, Ukraine wants to be free, and they shouldn't be invaded. I don't know how. It's so simple. And I don't understand why Russia would think, well, they could just go in and take it over now that they've gotten their nose bloodied. And they think somehow, well, we can shift the narrative. The reality is, the only narrative that is going to change is that Putin will have to acquiesce, because if he doesn't, it's only going to get worse. He will have to acquiesce. Look at what's happening now. It took NATO's parliament, now has designated him a terrorist state. The EU has now designated a terrorist state. So it's just getting progressively worse for Russia. And Russia's idea, somehow their response to all these actions, is to just turn the screws tighter. And you just want to look at them and say, okay, you tightening the screws has so far not aided you in any way, shape, or form. Why would you think this is going to benefit you now? Think about their possible end result, their end game. Well, let's launch nukes. That would be the worst possibility. So let's say they turn the screws as tight as they can by launching nuclear weapons. That would be the tightest the screws could be turned. And that will fundamentally draw the entire global community into conflict against Russia. There would just simply be no Russia after that. Now, yes, other places would suffer. Europe would suffer. There would be no doubt. But make no mistake, China, if you think they don't, look at parts of Russia with envious eyes, absolutely. They would love to take over sections of Russia. There are other countries that would love to be able to take over sections of Russia. So if if Russia were to just enact an end game of launching nukes, and, of course, Moscow is going to, be gone, or St. Petersburg, there's going to be different massive areas that are going to be gone. Well, there's not going to be any power base. And so there's not going to be really any Russia. And other countries are just going to go ahead and start sectioning off Russia piece by piece. So, and then, of course, that's the worst case scenario. Nobody expects that to happen. And certainly Russia doesn't want that to happen, no matter what they keep saying. But the point is that this continued ratcheting down on Ukraine has had nothing but the opposite effect for Russia at every turn. And this argument of saying Ukraine is not a country is just silly. It's just one of those arguments you just look at and go, really? That's where you're going to go with this? Like, there are people who don't even want to discuss it. They're just like, that's such a silly argument. It is literally a moot point to even discuss it. But this is not above Russian state media, because they are, I would say, they're not maximalists. They are extremists in their viewpoint, how they look at things. So they think this is a valid statement. And, of course, you've seen some of the things that come across RT, and you just kind of look at it and just shake your head and go, of course, you're going to have the 60, 70-year-old Russians that are going to follow this because they grew up in that old USSR, Soviet Union. So they only understand that. That's what they were raised under. They believe that might makes right, and that the Russian, ideology must be right. But the younger people in Russia, they're not buying this. They look at that and they're like, what is this? This is a joke. And I hate to say it, but it's almost like our conservative television over here. If you look at the demographic that follows our conservative television, it's a much older demographic that's stuck in this old ideology, thinking that the way we did things, during Reaganomics or during specifically the 80s for sure, that was, that's the way we should do things now. That fundamentally just can't be the way we do things, because time changes things and we have to adapt. But you have people who are stuck and they can't get out of it. And you got to, rip them. You got kicking and screaming the whole way, rip them into the future. And that's what's going to have to happen with Russian RT, with the Russian state television. It's going to be one of those things where they realize this isn't working. We have to change because our audience is changing.
Let me show you another thing. It's like some maps, it's free maps. Just this is like all from Russian propaganda. It's very interesting because it's from a website that is like the Voice of Sevastopol. It's only in Russian, but it's pretty understandable. But I can read Cyrillic, so I can read for the public. But we have also Russian speaker people in the group waiting. We are waiting for a war in Ukraine, so this is like Ukrainian, so they can confirm what I can say. So this was the first map with the division. This map is pre-February 2024. So we can understand that in the division of the ideal plan A of the war was, let's say, a capitulation of the actual government, but didn't happen. Right. And with the creation of, let's say, a satellite state that was what we see in green, that it's Ukraine and Cyrillic. And the southern part, that it's including also Kherson, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa Oblast, and Lugansk, and also Kharkiv. In the northeast, there is also Kharkiv inside Oblast. It was Novorossiya. In all the maps that was passing through, it was the same system. And if you check in the other one, the last one, that was still Russian propaganda, they call it Ukrainian, like a bit Nulandistan, like Victoria Nuland state. Okay, it's fun, but not super fun. But okay, the main thing is that if you check in also this map, the interesting thing is that in the ideal, let's say, situation of the conquer of the southern part of Ukraine, there are two problems in my point of view. First, if you don't want your border with NATO states, if you catch Bessarabia, that is the southern part of Moldova, your border will be with Romania. and there is a very big NATO base in Costanza that is like in the southern part of this map. Actually, also with Italian forces. So the Italian Air Force, it's in Costanza now. And the other thing that it's very evident also in this map, that if you catch, Transnistria was already connected with the maps of the let's say Novorossiya, with the Russian flags. So if the project was this one, actually it's not working at all, because the forces are stuck of the east of banks of Dnipro River, and the problem it's that I was talking with my friends journalist from Ukraine that I met like here in Italy, and it's the same question that I'm asking to all what I know of both sides, especially Ukrainians. It's like, if there is like a guarantee of a peace, could you let some, let's say, let's say some parts of Ukraine remain in control of Russians? The problem, in my point of view, is that actually there is not the condition of a negotiation between the two parts, because we are so deeply far away. I don't know if you get the same sensation, but there is no dialogue at all possible, because the two positions, I don't know. For the Ukrainians, the only peace is possible when the Russian is completely out.
Right. Absolutely.
For the Russian, they said that Ukraine is not a nation. So
absolutely. So absolutely. It's honestly, I agree 100%. Now remember, when you're saying Ukraine's not a nation, you're talking about so that's Russian propaganda. So there's when it comes to the Kremlin and it comes to the propaganda arm, those are two completely different things. The propaganda would say, hey, let's launch all-out nuclear war on Europe tomorrow. But that's not what the Kremlin's going to do. So I would never look at the Russian propaganda machine and think that that's actually what is the mindset within the Kremlin. The Kremlin understands that Ukraine is a nation, and the Kremlin also understands this war is going very, very poorly for them. So what they're doing, they're trying to, put their fingers in the dikes. They're trying to put their fingers in the holes and trying to figure out how to do. The real issue now for Russia is that at a political arm, from the political military arm in Ukraine, they no longer seeing themselves as having to talk to them. They basically can say, hey, leave our country and we'll talk at that point in time. And, Volodymyr Zelensky's actually made that. He's actually done that in a speech. He's given out his 10 key points of what has to be addressed. Now, those are, and if you look at those points, you just go, wow, that's a far cry away from a guy, who was, shaking his fist at the air 9 months ago. So it, time has changed. And so it has given Zelensky the ability to be able to say exactly that. Look, these are our demands. This is what needs to happen. And the key demand being the fighting has to stop and you have to leave our borders. So I think when we discuss the question marks regarding Ukraine, the only real question mark I have, the only true question mark I have, I don't question Donbass. I don't question Zaporizhia. I don't question Kherson. It's Crimea. Crimea is really the only true question mark. The rest of it is gone. Russia can just consider that a loss. There's nothing they can do about that. It really does.
I agree with you, Ken. But let's say only my question so you can answer to me, because this is the point that I also asking to the Ukrainians. If you have a guarantee complete, let's say the hypothesis that we did yesterday. Let's say Ukraine will be not a part of NATO and will be neutral in the constitution. That is not bad. Austria is neutral also, blah, blah, blah. But they can join European Union. So there will be flood of money for the reconstruction. So Russian is have their safety, military safety, that there is no NATO base, is not NATO ICBM, whatever in Ukraine or whatever. So, and you have to make an agreement of such a form of the Russian speakers in the Donbass region. autonomy, whatever. As I said to you, like Trentino Alto Adige, Sud Tirol in Italy. But it's a solution that I proposed to both parts that I knew at the beginning, because it's very similar, completely very similar.
Yes.
And can you see let's say, for example, to have the international recognition of Crimea as part of the Russian Federation? Why? My point of view, it's for the Ukrainians, it's not acceptable, because I asked them, okay, but also it's not acceptable to have a life condition like this one for a very long time, in my point of view.
And that's exactly it, right? So that's the only reason why I question it. You have, of course, you have strategists and you have logisticians that are looking at what is going to take to actually take over Crimea. They're long since already been doing that. They've been looking at battle plans. What would it require? The kind of manpower, the kind of equipment to take over Crimea. That's already been in play on Ukraine's part. And certainly, NATO's been, effectively looking at that and saying, okay, where's the best points of ingress, egress? How are we going to take this over? How will we defend the area? That's already been in place. So the question is the political will of NATO in fundamentally supporting Ukraine in their impetus to retake Crimea. Is that strong enough to supersede the global community looking and saying, hey, look, this has gone on for long enough. There's been a lot of death on both sides. How do we stop this? I don't know. And I do know here's a couple things, and we discussed this before. One thing, okay, let's say that Ukraine remains neutral. All right. The problem is you can't trust Putin. So that's a fundamental issue. And Putin is not going to give up power or be charged as a war criminal. That will never happen. So you're going to still have the same guy on, at the top who already invaded you once. And he's just going to say, well, this time I just won't invade you as long as you do this. Well, you cannot trust that. So that's a problem. And that's where you have Zelensky saying, I'm not going to just accept that because I already can't trust the guy. That's why he's even made mention. I will discuss, terms surrender, but I don't want to discuss it with Putin because, it's like leaving the leader of the army that's invading you in place and the army saying, well, we're just not going to do it again. Well, that just doesn't make any sense. Why would you trust that person? They're already found to be untrustworthy. The Ukrainian people have no desire. Ukrainian people have no. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I didn't want to interrupt, but I want to make only one small example. There is very, very interesting book that it's very old. It's called At the Highest Level, the Inside Story of the End of the Cold War. It's from Michael Beckloss and Strobe Talbot. I don't know if you know of them, but Strobe Talbot was like the consultant of the United States government during the 80s about Soviet Union, let's say. So, and they were talking in this book all about all the time previously the collapse of the Soviet Union. The interesting thing is that, in my opinion, it's that for the Americans, for Bush father, let's say, the optimal situation was that let's say the Soviet Union remained together, not of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because it was easier. I know that it's a nonsense, and they said, "Oh, the Cold War, it's finished, we won." But technically, George W. Bush father and Gorbachev were very friends, and they try to work together, to end technically the nuclear proliferation and whatever. The main thing is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, the US administration with Baker tried to maintain the nuclear security, forcing Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine to give back the nuclear warheads to the Russian Federation. Not because they didn't trust these three republics, but it was easier to make treaty with one instead of four. So, and so Budapest Memorandum, 1994, whatever. What I'm thinking is that I really cannot understand, and maybe you can help me because you are from USA. What could be the U.S. administration position with the Russian Federation government? Because maybe in one case, let's say we don't know what will happen after Putin. Maybe it will be someone worse, not better. So this is what I'm trying to explain. There is like this sentiment in a lot of people that understand a lot of Russian politics, that when you have a changement in the Russian government, nobody knows what will happen after. Like Putin was nobody before 1998, so nobody was thinking that Putin was able to come after Yeltsin was selected.
Yeah, he was a minor I think a assistant mayor or something like that. And
he was the assistant of the mayor of St. Petersburg. When he was like selected as prime minister.
Right.
And then Yeltsin was like dismissed by the charge by himself before the ending of the mandate. And so Putin was elected, but with very, very low, let's say, gradient in the polls. Then happened the second Chechen wars, and from that one became more popular and popular. This is why probably we didn't understand that Putin, for sure, it's a president of war, not of peace, because the started Chechen war, second Chechen war, Georgian war, all the conflicts. And a last thing that I wanted to put, and then give me your opinion. There is another news that is interesting from yesterday, that there was the OSTA, that is the equivalent of the NATO for the former Soviet republics. There was a meeting with the president of Armenia, and the president of Armenia refused to make the picture next to Putin. So
he snubbed him.
And I have friends both sides also in this let's say war, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and it's very interesting, this one, because when Armenia attacked with all the zone all around Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenia called the equivalent of the NATO Article 5 of the OSCE, Russia denied the entrance to protect Armenia. So it's something. And now the first supplier of Armenia of weapons, it's not Russian anymore, but India.
Wow. Tell you how times have changed, huh?
and India sold to Armenia. You can check it. It's very interesting. They sold to Armenia one copy of the M777 artillery system, copied by the Indians. So it's the same, but Indian.
Yeah, of course. That's copy culture. So answering your first question, or not your first question, but your first statement, you were talking about somebody being possibly worse than Putin. Yeah, that there's no doubt. I mean, you can end up with somebody like, Prigozhin back, in as far as in power, which is possible. I mean, that guy just sent a sledgehammer to the EU, to give you an idea of his mentality. So, can there always be somebody worse? Yes. But again, you have the checks and balances of reality. The only drawback being, of course, nuclear weapons. That's always going to be a contentious issue for everybody. We don't want the person who ends up in power to be much more laissez-faire with the ideology of using nuclear weapons. So that is going to be the fundamental break line where we look at and say, okay, what is this next person going to be like? We just don't want them to be beyond that. It really is a moot point. We've already shown, the West has already shown, and a good portion of the world has already shown their displeasure with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sanctions have already proved that. So long as this next person who goes in and replaces Putin, if anybody ever does, isn't an extremist where he'd be willing to, utilize nukes, I don't think the West really cares. I think, it would be nice if we get somebody who could play ball, but if somebody who doesn't, well, then we just keep the sanctions going and, we just keep playing this out long term because it's not adversely affecting us. Everybody is starting. Well, I shouldn't say it's not adversely affecting. The gas and the oil is a problem, but that is something that people are addressing rapidly. So it's inevitably not going to be an issue. So now what else are you losing? Well, not really much. I mean, so there's real no net benefit. You weigh the cost, the ROI, the return on investment of helping Russia that would be willing to push outside its boundaries, because it's not like they're going to, your maps that you showed, it's not like they would stop with Ukraine. Moldova would certainly be next. I mean, that would be no question. They already have, Transnistria. So taking over the rest of Moldova or certainly making a puppet state would be no issue for them. So it's not like they're going to stop with what they're doing. And everybody recognizes that's why everybody fundamentally is fighting against them. So as long as this next person, whoever it is that ends up replacing Putin, is an extremist, that would be willing to utilize nukes, I don't think anybody's really concerned with it where they're worried about having to change their mindset. Now, the other question you had asked, you had talked about, I'm sorry, actually, I kind of got lost on that next one. You had brought up another point, and oh man, I can't remember what it was. I'm sorry. You brought up two things. You brought up the leadership change, and you brought up something else, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it is.
No, I said only that, what is your opinion about the U.S. administration position about maybe how we can deal with the next government of Russia after the end of the war? And I agree with you. I wanted only to agree with you with what you said, but maybe also the international community will push both parts to find a deal, because probably after 2 years of let's say very difficult situation with COVID, plus another year of war in Ukraine, plus we will have for sure at least 6 months of technical recession in 2023. I don't know if a world population will be able to resist in one other year of, let's say, bad economical situation without losing the control of the people, as we were talking before the live, starting from China and whatever. And so it will be difficult.
And I hear you, except there's one very real, there's a truth to that. And that is Putin invaded Ukraine. And you are fundamentally dealing with somebody who cannot be trusted and has already shown that he has no regard for borders. And so even if you make a deal with him, this is why Europe is fighting so hard. Make no mistake, it's not because they're fundamentally, gee, we need to help out Ukraine. There is self-preservation in this. Had they allowed him just to take over Ukraine, they know that he would have not have stopped at that. And they recognize that. And we can sit here now, you and I can sit here and go, oh, well, no, he wouldn't have invaded anybody else. Really? How do we know that? How can you, he's already done it. What's to stop him from doing it again? What's if his next act would have been invading Poland or invading another sovereign nation? There's no, you tell me, Romania, where is it that he stops? Oh, well, NATO would stop him. I don't know, maybe. I would think maybe it would, but the reality is you can't really be sure. And so, what about those Near East nations where he would want to actually, look at, oh, that was the other thing you had mentioned. I remember what it was now. We talked about the fact that he was snubbed by Armenia. That actually is not the first time that wasn't the first time that happened to him. He was actually snubbed by Kazakhstan about 3 months ago when he sat down with them in the Kazakhstan. He literally looked at him and was dressing down Putin, where he was telling him, hey, look, this is what we expect, which would have never happened 9 months ago. And now you have, that first crack in the wall. Now people are looking at him and saying, yeah, this guy's, he's kind of a jerk. He's willing to invade whomever, and we need to stand up to him, because if we don't, he may just as well easily invade us. So I think that's what you're looking at. You're looking at yeah, of course, part of the defense is, or part of the rationale is defending Ukraine, but the other half, of course, is just self-preservation and saying, look, this guy's, he's a madman. He'd be willing to invade Ukraine. What's to stop him from invading anywhere else? And I think that's, I fundamentally, I think at its core, I think that's exactly what you're looking at. So.
I was checking because it was interesting. Also, another case that it's now happening. I don't know if there is like a lot of news about it in US, but I'm collecting the questions. So for the public that is watching, put all the questions that you want. We are waiting for War in Ukraine that is connecting now, so we will have a little bit of chat with him about the military situation. There is not a lot of news, but I think that all the updated news from Ukraine will coming in a while.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I wanted to show an interesting case about like the ethnicity in also in Moldova, because I went many years in Moldova. So I traveled all the region by car, and I think that this problem about the Russian ethnical group in all the former Soviet Union republics, it's a problem generated by the Union itself, because the theory of the maintenance of the control of the population during the Soviet Union was to don't create like so big group of one only ethnical origin in all the republics. So if you check, you have, for example, the northern part of Kazakhstan, it's all ethnical Russian. 90% of the people that is living in the northern Kazakhstan, it's Russian. It's not Kazakhstan people. So war in Ukraine is coming with us.
Yeah, wonderful.
Ciao. Hi.
Hello. I just freed up and I apologize for.
No problem. So we are happy.
Better later than never in this case.
It's okay. I'm sorry that I am GMT +1. I will complain.
No, okay, yeah. So my confusion was it's GMT, and I'm like, okay. So just put CET so I understand what you.
I will do it, but because
it's actually kind of confusing.
No, all the time zone in the world, it's so complicated. Like, I don't know, Ken, it's from Washington State, Pacific and this Pacific Standard Time. So okay. it's I'm freaking out because I have so many time zones in the groups. So
I think what was confusing +1 time. If you just put +1 hour, I would like, oh, okay, makes sense. I was like, what is it one time?
No problem.
But that's okay. I'm just like, okay, I'm glad that it's all good. It's all fine.
I'm so happy that you came. So it's for the public, like if you have any type of question about military situation and whatever, what in Ukraine is with us. We were talking a little bit about some declaration. I want to share with you also because you came. This one, because it's so you are from Ukraine, so you can understand it better. This is like Russian propaganda today that are still pushing that, you see, like Ukrainians are Russian who have been convinced that they are special, more than Europeans, and more racial poor and more correct Russian. So they are still.
Sorry to say that they forgot to mention that there was that Ukrainian nation was conceived by the Hungaro-Austrian military headquarters. That's a typical story, that this was a creation of the Austro-Hungarian military higher command.
Okay,
that's their story.
I have to push it to my Russian friend that they mismatch this propaganda, so they can change it.
No, but so they updated. So they actually missed the they don't do a good job. They don't do the whole story that they typically put there. They miss the key parts there.
Okay, and now we were talking about now when you enter, because I was talking to the public also that this problem about the mixing of the ethnical groups in the former Soviet Union, because I traveled a lot also in Moldova. And for example, in Moldova, the northern part, it's Ukrainian or Russian speaking. mostly of
northern part. I never been actually to Moldova. Northern part, I was surprised.
Yes, northern part plus Transnistria.
Right.
And in Transnistria, it's very strange case. I was there like in 2015, 2016, that when like the Russian, let's say, took the Moldova, that was after 1944, during the Second World War.
No, they took it in the 1940, actually.
No, because the Romanian take it back to the Dnistro River.
Right, but they owned it for 1 year. So
yeah. Okay, but this is only like to understand that the main problem is that Transnistria was never Romanian before, let's say.
Okay,
And the main thing is that during the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union created this language that doesn't exist, that it's Moldovan. And technically, the Moldovan language, it's like Romanian written in Cyrillic, with some Russian words in it.
Well, they were doing the same as Ukrainian, by the way. So it's not. It's a sort of imperial policy. I'm sure they were doing it with every other, like in Central Asia, those those countries there, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They were doing the same
but the main
thing.
The main thing is that you have Cyrillic in your alphabet, and Moldova no. So they were Latin. So they converted also the alphabet. And if you go to Moldova now, after 1991, they created like the national anthem. It's called Limba Noastră, it's like our language, and converted from Cyrillic to Latin, except in Transnistria. If you go in Transnistria, everything is written in 3 languages: Ukrainian, Russian, Moldovan, and Moldovan is still in Cyrillic. So it's a mess. So and the main thing is that historically I found that this strategy to maintain the control of the former Soviet Republic during the Soviet Union, to mix the population and the ethnic groups, to don't have let's say in Ukraine, I don't want to have a big group of Ukrainians, so I mixed with Russians. The same in northern Kazakhstan, the same Baltic states, because in the Baltic states you have 30% of Russian ethnic groups.
That's a typical imperial policy that's been done. Like, this is not Russian invention. That they actually borrowed it from actually Roman Empire, by the way. That's what they've been done like for thousands of years. This is not like something new. The only difference what they do, they first do basically like ethnic genocide. So when you say like, okay, 30 or 40% of Latvians disappeared, right? Well, they didn't disappear; they were killed. The same as Ukrainians. Like, so first there is genocide, and then they ship basically Russians. Like, Russia itself is not like it's not like one ethnic sort of group. It's in many ways, it's like, if you really think about Russia, the best analogy is actually US.
Yes,
it's a melting pot of different ethnic groups.
I
know what you mean. Yeah, it's a melting pot. Sure,
it's a melting pot. Well, it's not really it's a forging place where people don't melt because they want to melt, but they forced in a way to be,
you're forced to melt whether you like it or not.
Yes, in Russia specifically, like it's even hardcore basically, because if you look at the Russia, it's actually, they even used to be like federation. That's why it's federation, right? There's a reason why it's not like Russia. Well, people say Russia, but it's not Russia. The correct name, legal name, and always being Russian Federation, which means like there are like I don't remember like exact number, but it's between like 60 to 80 ethnic groups there.
Yes.
So this is not even like 2-3 dominating or whatever. It's huge. It's a how to say this patchy saying, but they all brainwashed in idealized. Ideologized by the government to kind of like, nothing. I'm not picking on US, but like it's literally how it is done in US. In this way, except US much more milder, softer, not like brutal and all that stuff, but it's the same idea.
So let me ask you this, because I heard you guys kind of going back and forth on this whole concept of, Ukraine existing, not existing, which I got to tell you fundamentally, and I'm not trying to sound like an arrogant American here, but that's almost a jocular point of view for us. Like, we would look at that and just go, that's laughable. I mean, if you want to be free, you have the right. I mean, that's our whole kind of ideology, right? If you want to be free, you have a right to be free. So that viewpoint that keeps getting argued back and forth, Russia, it's not even something that Americans would even consider a valid point to even debate.
And again, I agree with you.
I'm not trying to sound like an arrogant American, but here's what I'm asking. Here, to follow me here. Do you believe that the last 30 years, quite frankly, of not being under the Soviet Union's yoke, where Ukraine has fundamentally been allowed to kind of, forge its own path forward, do you think that has pushed this notion, this same concept that we, of course, have had in America for 200 and some years, in that country, where they're just like, yeah, well, okay, great. You want to keep fighting whether or not we existed 100 years ago, if we've been around for 1,000 years, which I would argue that's the truth, but fine. Let's just say that's not the case. What does that matter anymore to the Ukrainian people? Do you think that's because they've been fundamentally allowed to forge their own path, that they don't even consider that an argument anymore? To them, it's a joke. It's like, no, we don't. We're Ukrainian. We don't care how many other people from other nations are coming here. We all fly under the blue and yellow flag, and this is our nation. And do you think that's what's happened?
This is actually much more nuanced than that.
Okay.
First of all, I do agree. Like, if people fight, then you exist.
Right. Exactly.
No matter what, like whatever someone says, you don't exist. You punch someone else in the face. You exist because
you exist. Right here, you go. There you go.
So that's a definition of like it exists, right? Like by empirical sort of evidence is the strongest evidence you can have, right, in the world. So that's the first saying. And let's say it did not exist. Let's assume that they're right. It never existed. They essentially created it, right? If you believe that their story, because they created it by hitting this punch ball, they created it, and the punch ball hitting back.
But so again, I don't care. Like, as an American,
right? No, I know, but I'm gonna be like, so I'm gonna kind of like really, because it's all very nuanced, and people kind of try to make it always black and white, and it's never black and white. You see me? It's like, thousands, shades of gray.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So that's what really life is. And so, okay, and then going back in terms of like, what Ukrainian people think, it's first of all, you said like, oh, Ukraine was sort of like allowed to forge its path since 1991. So I would say that's not true. Ukraine was not really forging its path for past 30 years. And many in Ukraine realizing that
forging
really
path forward, not backward, not its past.
No, I know. I'm saying that like, no, right. So what I'm trying, exactly. So so maybe I'm not pronouncing it very well. So you may, there is maybe confusion about this, how I pronounce the. So it's P-A-T-H, because I'm also a little bit sick. So it's also path.
Correct.
So I think hopefully I said it right. So the path
you did.
never started in 1991 for Ukraine. It was in limbo. So the Soviet Union burst on its own because of its own problems, right? And Ukraine really got its, sort of call it, independence for free. And independence is never free, right? So what happened at that time is that essentially, and we can have like all conspiracy theories and all that stuff, but what really happened is old communist and KGB system remained in place in Ukraine. Do you understand? So it was still run, and that is really represented by the, call it like, in terms of physical people, they basically were sent from Russia and mixed all of this. They started creating this kernel of this like Soviet person, and they did not, take over the whole, Soviet Union, but let's say there was 0.5% of that created. Sort of like, those people who kind of started believing they're Soviet people, let's say, They're not Ukrainians, they're not Russians, they're not Tatar, they're not Latvians, they're not Belarus. That there's sort of like new identity, sort of like in the US in many ways, right? Where you come and you kind of like, there's desire to erase your identity and you are American now. So the same was happening there with the Soviet Union. Was actually Soviet Union in many ways actually was parroting US, but in try to mimic, but in sort of like a poor copy of the US basically, and horrific copy of the US, I would say. And so that core was running the country till about, I would say, 2014, like really hardcore, and it was doing everything. So it's in a way like you have people who try to basically, steal everything, corrupt everything, and run things into the ground. So basically, like what you think about leadership, it tries to basically run everything into the ground to prove psychologically to the general let's say Ukrainian population, that no, you guys not capable of doing it. You're not capable of like having your own country. So it's in a way like it's maybe sometimes we'll get to those archives in KGB. That's almost like a psychological warfare on Ukrainian population at large, and I'm saying more ethnical Ukrainian population, right? Because there's definitely a lot of ethnic groups because it was mixed with by Soviets on intentionally. And they just try to like, hey, you're not capable, you losers, right? Instill that, and everything was done like taxes through the roof. You cannot economically, it's economic desert was created in Ukraine. It went like Ukraine was sort of at 1991 in terms of capability was like equivalent of Germany or France, like industrial. And I'm not talking about the agriculture, primitive stuff, like really like advanced things, right? Okay. All of that was lost. All of that was destroyed, right? And part of it, why like Donbass, all of that region got super, how'd say, like against like Ukraine, the whole idea of Ukraine, because that's where the most damaging like result of those policies were. They were totally devastated. It's horrific area there, like for people, right? And they don't understand. They feel like, Ukrainian government, right, is doing horrible things to us. They destroying us, whatever, like making our life impossible. And then there's a lot of Russian ethnic, background. And then they steer from the other side. You see, Ukrainian government is horrible. You need to get out from there and, join Russia, essentially. That's kind of like how it was played. So till 2014, Ukraine was not developing. It actually was going down, drowning. Then in 2014, it wasn't even started developing because the guy who came into power was, again, from the same, all of that corrupt. It was less corrupt, sort of like halfway there. So he was running country to 2019. So again, nothing was happening. Everything was the same, stealing. And then most of these people, once they steal enough, they just go either to West or they go to Russia. So that's just like...
I thought it was nice he gave away Crimea for you. That was really sweet of him.
Well, no. I'm not talking Yanukovych. No.
Oh, okay.
That was after Yanukovych came, like Poroshenko. He was, just what he was doing, the same as Yanukovych, except he was saying, "Oh, I'm pro-West." That's all. There's no difference. There's no difference.
And you forgot that he sells chocolate.
Oh yes, and he has diabetes. I want to say as well. And he sells diabetes to everybody. He's the
biggest producer of chocolate in Ukraine.
What? Yes. No. Well, he basically he did also in corrupt ways, but let's just not how he basically monopolized the entire market in a corrupt ways. But that's not the point of this conversation,
right?
And so till 2019, nothing was the same. There was no development. There was no path forward in Ukraine. It was basically in limbo. People were leaving in droves Ukraine because of that. Because it's horrific economic environment. You cannot build your future there. You see what I mean? Okay. Whatever dreams you have, you cannot accomplish though. So like, think about this. You couldn't even pay in foreign currency abroad if you need to. You have to get a license from the central bank. Like, it was so sick and Soviet, basically. They kept all of this Soviet, like, crazy the basically totalitarian like concentration camp, right?
Sure.
Economically, but it was cleverly done. It was rhetoric politically. Oh yeah, we're building Ukraine, whatever. But like in essence, economically, and most people understand it because it's very abstract. So, and especially if you're coming from the Soviet sort of legacy as a person, you never seen norm like how it should be. You've seen all of this economic totalitarian camps, so you feel like, okay, that's how it's supposed to be. And so till 2019, there was nothing happening again. Then this one, Zelensky comes, and there would be actually new Maidan, basically, if that guy Poroshenko stayed, if he tried to sort of stay. It was, people totally were ready to another 2014. But it happened in peaceful way. He got kicked out by actually accident. And this new one came, totally puppet of oligarchs like the Zelensky, not anything, actually very pro-Russian, by the way, but he does not, disclose that. There's a lot of evidence of him like basically working for Russia. So essentially that KGB, how to say, agents, they got back into power in Ukraine in 2019. And really Ukraine started really developing in like since 2024, February of this year. This is like really Independence Day. This is where Ukraine, at this point, these people, like these KGB agents, they cannot control. The power of people is so strong that they cannot, define the future at this point. They try to steer it in the wrong way. They make it like as bad as possible. You see, there's no desire to start manufacturing any military equipment. There's no desire to get to do anything. Ukraine is extremely capable like country in terms of like industrially. And it has pretty much everything you need to be standalone country and like don't buy anything from the world. So nothing is being done, not even trying to do anything. They put this people in the Ministry of Defense, the part that's it's called Ukroboronprom. So basically Ukrainian defensive industry, which government owned, centralized, the typical Soviet approach. Put their corrupt people. They don't do anything. They don't develop any new sort of weapon system. Just still like basically pocket the money, and that's it. So they basically, it's still like, process of people actually like regular grassroots people waking up and saying, no, we don't want this clown. And, I mean, this is like KGB agent as well. And this is going on. But the problem is that, like everybody's scared. This is war. And people scared, okay, if he's gone, then like, okay, who's going to represent us? Then Russia can really like, we will be in very difficult position. You see what I mean? Like politically on international affairs. But things are changing, right? Those people, and it's in a way kind of like a centrifuga. Do you understand what centrifuga is?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
It's spinning, and all of those people who not committed to Ukraine leaving for whatever reason, like they flee west. Most of them flee west. Some like 1.5 left to Russia. You getting to the core who actually wants to fight and wants to build their own future, and there's still no idea of that future. So this is kind of like like in a way like baby being born just right now. So hopefully that explains to you that like there was that, just throw away that those 30 years, actually 30 and plus 30.5 years.
It does present one question though. My question being, because you had mentioned that Zelensky, being a in bed with the KGB at one point in time, or certainly working with him maybe in some capacity, unless I misunderstood you. But
no, you're right. That's
yeah.
the key.
So my question is, if Putin's fear was Ukraine possibly joining NATO, where did that come from? If the leader of that particular nation obviously is somebody he knew, or maybe not knew, but understood, but where's the whole point of the invasion? Why would Putin even feel the need to invade Ukraine if he feels he has a pro-Russian, ally in the leadership position there?
Right. So you would this is because you think that like it's a king. It's not a king. It's like a rubber band. You can sort of a little bit stretch the rubber, but you cannot change the direction of the rubber. You see what I mean? So basically, he can affect where it goes. But if the will is we want to go off the entire population, and there's overwhelming will there, we're going to go west. We don't want to go to Russia. What he tries to do, he tries to sort of put like sticks in your will so you don't go there fast. Do you understand what I mean? Like, so he cannot drive, like, not to go to basically to the west.
Let me tell you, I don't think that's a stick. I think that was pretty much a shot in the face. I mean,
No. What I'm
invading
saying,
the
I'm talking
sovereign
about
borders
Zelensky.
isn't
I'm talking about
prodding somebody. That's beating them over the head with a mace.
No. He was talking about Zelensky, not about Putin.
I'm talking about Zelensky. I'm not talking about the Putin. I'm not talking Putin. Putin is on his own, sort of like he has his own. There is more to that war than just. But big part of it, and most people really don't understand what sort of drives Putin and Russian president, let's put it this way, and all of his clique there, all of that KGB brass, is also economic reasons. Economic reasons are probably more. This is basically the story about the NATO.
I agree with that.
It's in a way kind of like a facade just for ordinary people to think like, oh yeah, we're fighting for great Russia, all of that, and that NATO is
it's an oligarch. It's lining their pockets. Of that, there's no doubt.
Yeah. So there are like these pipelines that go through Ukraine of natural gas and crude oil as well.
Okay.
And there's more. Also, like I mentioned, there's some ammonia pipeline. There's there's tons of stuff like infrastructure that goes through Ukraine. You see like 140 BCM.
Okay.
Right. Europe consumes from Russia 200. So you understand, he wants basically to control.
It's a little bit less. It's 155 now.
No, I'm saying like was like, let's say year, like whatever, like begin like 2020, let's say, or 2019, before the whole thing started like blowing, like all
100. It was 155. It's about million.
Well, okay, I'm pretty clear. I'm pretty certain about the number, but I'm referring before this whole COVID started.
I was going to say, let's not hang up on the minutia, because this is interesting, because now you're talking about the economic gain for the oligarch of Russia and how that could actually be the real impetus of why they actually want to start this conflict. Which
so what they want to control. Basically, they hooked up Europe on this heroin needle.
Correct.
And they want to stick that heroin needle as deep in the body as possible. Right, for them to basically control Europe and not even like continental Europe. They know UK that's going to be like, that's it, like they will never win that. They only care about continental one, and what they want is they want to separate that and basically this continental Europe from, let's say, US and UK. So basically, and then the next step, basically, so that Europe is becoming like a machine building factory for Russian top, then to eventually they want to destroy US and UK. So use that, similar how, let's say, you don't get upset, but like that's not a typical story that you learn in the history classes, but similar how they used Hitler, Soviet Union, Stalin, how he used Hitler to actually destroy Europe. And this is the same to actually destroy the world and conquer the world. So the same tool being applied here. And they want to.
You're talking about early on. You're talking about 1940. Okay.
I'm talking about like 38, 39, 40, up till 41. Okay. Basically all of that.
Until he decided to invade. Exactly.
So his nickname was Icebreaker. So the Hitler's nickname was Icebreaker. But going back, so this is what they want. So they need to control food. So in order to stick that needle in Europe, they fully need to control all of this pipeline, natural gas and crude oil pipeline. So they can turn the button, turn off the button. And Belarus, they control 100%. Then they build this Nord Stream 1 and 2. And then through Ukraine, there is a problem. In Ukraine, it just happened that this oligarchs in Ukraine, that they kind of like a little bit like they sort of say like, hey, we work for you, Russia. We, your agents, but at the same time, they try to loot it and they try to, steal that and control that Russian, pipeline, the Russian natural gas that goes through Ukraine. So they kind of basically, get more power against, get more leverage against the, like Moscow KGB. Basically, it's like, think about this. It's like a feudal country, right, that fell apart. And then vassal is trying to get get more power against the feudal king, so he has better negotiating policy, gets more money to him in his pocket, as opposed to a feudal king will give very little money to that. And that's how it actually first started in the first place, like this whole like fight, and why Russia actually built this Nord Stream 1 and 2, why they started building it, because they feel like, okay, this clowns are not fully controllable, like unlike Belarus, where it's like 100%, you push the button, you get 100% result. Here you push the button, it's like, well, 60% result, 40% may not be work out. And when you really, when you're at war, you need like everything work like a clock. And so this is unreliable peace, right? And those oligarchs, they started also like, okay, you know what, we're gonna, as sort of because it didn't start like right away. It's like, like a spiral. Then oligarchs see like, okay, Russians kind of like trying to, withhold this natural gas from us. Then, okay, we're gonna, as a next step, we're gonna sort of declare we're gonna go to West. They kind of like, play this game. Then Russians do, intensify situation. They also intensify situation. And this is kind of like how it came to all this big sort of blow up. But it would not be possible without support of Ukrainian population. So, it's basically alignment of interest of very different groups that see no future together, but they just align the interest. Like basically, this oligarchs wanted, this vassal wanted more power, and Ukrainian population wanted to go west and build their own future. So they kind of like were aligned. At the same time, this vassal is looting that population. So it's kind of very crazy, like not crazy, it's actually how real life is. It's not, black and white, as I said. It's a lot of shades of gray. And so this is how it happened. And by the way, in this oligarchs, it's also not like, it's also like, spectrum. Some of them like hardcore pro, KGB agents, literally hardcore. Then there's the middle, and there's like the part of it is like least sort of like, more pro-West, but saying like, yeah, we're pro-KGB. So eventually this is also like centrifugal, separated. Those who like totally hardcore KGB agents were kicked out to Russia. Then you have like right now middle left and more pro-West left. And even this middle is being also separated. Basically what happens is middle is how the separation happens. Is most of them just literally just moved to West and just decided to live there, forget Ukraine, and they just kind of put their roots there and they just live their life, and they don't want to, they don't want to have to do anything with Ukraine because it's becoming a problem. Before it was very good asset to loot. It's like I call it like slave plantation, excellent slave plantation that you can milk. Now it's becoming a problem. It's a wasteland. Right, so nobody wants to, there's nothing to loot, so they just go to the greener pastures, and that's why, that's why I'm saying that Ukraine is being born like in front of our eyes, and it's not like one day. It's probably going to take 3, 4, 5 years. This is going to be a long process. It started, so the ignition, it's like in a rocket. The ignition started, but the real launch hasn't really happened yet. And the real launch is going to happen once this Zelensky going to get kicked out. And that's where it's going to be really start to go sort of interesting, let's put it this way.
So let me ask you this. Where do you see the threat of NATO or the threat of Ukraine joining NATO as far as any impetus whatsoever for Putin's invasion into the country?
It's just minor. It's totally minor stuff. Look, I mean, NATO is like Baltic states, NATO on his borders. It's the same distances from Kyiv to Moscow as from, let's say, Riga or the eastern border of Latvia to Moscow, about 700 kilometers.
Okay.
Where's like, I mean, it's just like, and even if you think about this, like all Russia, like large industrial facilities, they're deep in Russia, in like Urals. Yes. Siberia, even like like Western Siberia, you cannot get like it's still like.
I went there. I saw them. So it's because but the reason, if I can say, if I can show like to the public a map, this is very interesting because it's like about the different ethnical groups in Russia. So as you said, it's a super mix of ethnical groups.
Yeah, it's a whole mix.
I went like in Russia. I visited the Caucasus, Bashkiria, and Moscow Oblast, And in Ufa, it is like the last cities before the Urals. It was very interesting because during the Second World War, they were afraid that the Nazis were able to conquer Moscow, and so they moved everything to Ufa.
Yeah.
Heavy industries, the FSB, that was NKV,
NKVD, yeah.
NKVD, everything was moved, and it was unreachable by ground. So, and the main thing is that like the heavy industries is as well, like oil, heavy industries, everything.
Yeah. So like, but the main center is really Yekaterinburg, which is like
Yekaterinburg. It's for who don't know the Russian geography. It's over the Urals, so it's far.
Right, it's totally unreachable. Like, let's put this way: Russia, because of its size, is excellently protected. Like, not maybe as excellently as US, but pretty good. Let's put this way. Like next, like say US is number one because it's oceans, right?
Sure.
And Russia is number two because it's so much, and it's all of this like area is like, it's in a way, and I'm gonna say hostile. It's for the people who are not from there. It looks hostile because the climate is not the perfect one. But once you grew up there, you actually enjoy it. But for the rest, it looks like crazy, bad, whatever. But it's just different, all right. And the coldness and this extreme temperature. Because it's continental climate there, it's all like changing. You can go from like plus 35 to 10 in one day, basically day and night. So
you have natural barriers too. I mean, you have the Urals, you have the Gobi. There's natural barriers.
Right.
And also, if I can say to you, to the east, it's very interesting because if China wanted to, let's say, take some part, not next to Vladivostok, but to the north, like Mongolia, it's very difficult to pass through because it's
that's the Gobi, yeah.
It's a island desert, so it's difficult to pass through. And another thing that I want to show, I was in Japan like 20 days, and for me it was very interesting why the Russians are still maintain the control of the Kuril Island in the north of Japan. And my friend that is like a professor in Japan said to me that it's the only passage of for the submarines where the Russians had not to pass into any NATO states in the world. If you check, like for example, in the Black Sea, they have to pass through Turkey. In the Baltics, they have to pass through like Sweden,
around Denmark, around Denmark.
And in that part, it's let's say that I want to attack the US or whatever. It's the only part in the world where the nuclear submarines can pass through Vladivostok and
I see.
Going out.
That's very interesting. I didn't know about that.
And this is why the Japan want them back, but the Russians don't give them back. And if I can show another interesting image that we can talk about, I'm collecting some questions just to close, and I don't know, in the 20-30 minutes maximum. This is like the language separation, let's say ethnical division in Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. If you see, it's an interesting other case that, as I said to you, like in Moldova, eastern part, northern part were speaking Russians.
Mm-hmm.
In the southern part, it's another interesting thing. When you see like green, dark green, it's a special part of Moldova. Probably you know, but Ken, I'm sure that never heard about it. But it's called Gagauzia, and it's another example of the mix, the incredible. Moldova, it's so small and so mixed. And this part, Gagauzia, it's a Turkish ethnical group, so they speak Turkish. Because it's like an heritage of the Ottoman Empire, because Moldova was a part of Ottoman Empire before being a part of Russia, and they are Turkish but Orthodox, so they are not Muslims. So it's very complicated. If you go there, they don't speak like, they don't say like Dobre Utra or Paka, they say Salam Aleikum. So it's very complicated. And also in About Ukraine.
Sorry, let me interrupt you. So what the Russian actually trying to do right now? They try. It doesn't work, but they try to blow up Moldova as well by instigating this Gagauz, which is Tatars, to
By instigating what?
instigate to sort of kind of like create another DNR LNR basically, like in Ukraine.
They are pushing. It's
they're trying to, but it doesn't work.
But in the West, in Moldova, there was the biggest financial scam in history, but it's not so popular in with the West. In 2017, if I remember, they robbed $5 billion in one day, but it's like 1/3 of the GDP of the nation,
of the country. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, in one day.
Jeez.
And the guy who was robbing this was like the prime minister at that time. That was Filat that went in jail. But the other one was Ilor Shor. I think that you know him. And he's like Jewish Moldovan politicians. And that the Jewish because he was born in Israel. And he's famous because like he is also, let me say to you, it's the husband of a very, very famous Russian singer. I think that you know her. The name is, let me say to you, Jasmine. You know her?
And sounds familiar. Yeah.
No,
that was the uncle?
Jasmine, no, it is like the husband of Ilor Shor. And now, like, there is a lot of, let's say, protest pro-Russian in Moldova because the president now it's like pro-Western. She's a woman and she is called Maya Sandu and very popular. And he got a lot of votes from the Moldovan diaspora in Europe. For example, in Italy, we have a lot of Moldovans and Romanians because the language is very similar. So for them, moving to Italy, it's very easy because they can learn the language very fast. For the Ukrainians, it's much different, much difficult. And so the problem is Moldova is 100% dependent by the Russian gas. So the last days, I don't know if we're in Ukraine had this news, but there was, I don't know, the Russians said that the Ukrainians were robbing the gas that was going through the pipeline to Moldova. And so they said we will stop the pipeline. And the Ukrainians say, no, it's not true. We are giving them all the gas that is going to Moldova. But the problem is also the prices because Moldova is the poorest state in Europe.
Correct.
It's easy to, let's say, threat them with the price of the gas. Like if you will be too much pro-Western, we will double the price of the gas. And it's easy to change the government in a fast way. And okay, let me
actually add something about this map because I actually want to, if you don't mind, because I mean I'm looking at the map. If you can put that map, language map,
yes,
because it actually not somewhere, I don't know where it's coming from Russian side, but I can tell you because I'm from some of these regions. When they show like this northern Ukraine, separately like central and like the like what's the name of it, Zhytomyr region, like Rivne, there's no Russian there. This is like a lot of it is actually not true here. They over how to say,
but it's written based on Kiev National Linguistic University data, Ukraine 2009.
I understand that, but I can tell you this that this doesn't make sense to me as the local. I can say I can go there and like everybody speaks Ukrainian, like they don't speak Russian. Let's say northern Zhytomyr region, that region they don't, they may speak in the cities because it's like, because what is here is not very, in a way, many like misleading, because Russian population or Russian ethnic population, and then really concentrated in the cities. So in a way, like rural area is all Ukrainian. Like even for example, this Kherson region, all like Kherson region rural, is 100% pro-Ukrainian, 100 speak Ukrainian. Like it's only
Okay.
the cities, because goes to the history of how Soviet Union was trying to sort of Russianize Ukraine. They were sending most of their sort of Russian or from different ethnic group, whatever, just different people to cities, and they would be factory workers. And so that's where this Russian side comes. They like, because all of this so-called like the rural is obviously peasants, and it's all 100% Ukrainian pretty much, with the exception of some areas where they did this genocide in 32, 33, and they were literally like people. There's almost no people, like certain like districts. So in a couple of like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 districts, they literally send people from Russia to repopulate there, because pretty much, let's say you have like 10% people left there, 90% died. So that was but those were like, they're still like small portion, but this is fundamentally wrong approach how this, I don't know, like who did. And this is another going back. So there's a lot of pro-Russian agents there, or people who really sympathize, but then they go into the kind of like infiltrate the system, and then they produce from the Ukrainian National Linguistic Institute this kind of stuff, so it looks very legitimate. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I understood.
And
no,
then,
but
this is being spread around in the West, and this is like your argument. And I can tell you, like, if we had like separate conversation, I can tear this apart in very factual, scientific approach.
I didn't want to take it as I took the first one that I find, but because I wanted to show only like the melting pot of the languages and whatever, not to show.
And
this
like, this is yaplakal.com. This is like actually kind of like a KGB fun outlet, basically.
Okay.
Like it's creating like, it's for fun, but then they push their kind of stuff there. It's
kind of like impetus. I need to come back to this. I want to come back to something. Like if the impetus, if you say that the impetus of the war was a business decision based on control of oil and gas, then what would you say is the impetus at this point in time of continuing to fight the war, when obviously this has had an absolute reverse in effect on that control? What would you say the impetus is now? Do you think it's strictly self-preservation?
No, it's not self-preservation. They just see that their plan failed, so they say, okay, we're gonna blow you up as well, West. The Russian openly say on TV, you know what? If there is no Russia, then this world should not exist.
But remember, I don't believe. I don't believe. I'm right off the bat. The Russian propaganda and the Kremlin are two totally different arms. I don't, what they say. The Kremlin has its own way.
This is obviously extreme, right? This is obviously extreme. They probably will not blow themselves up, but the way they see it, you know what? If we have problems, we're going to create as many problems to you as possible. So you come to us and we'll negotiate. Because what he was doing before the war started, he was writing these letters to the West, please come to us, agree to our terms. And the West was saying like, no, get lost with your terms. I mean, the last one was, I think, in December of 2021. That was kind of like last drop. And he's totally losing, right? And then the other part is like, you should also understand the energy policy, right? West is run, in my view, by, by corrupt extremists in terms of energy policy, right? So they all I
wouldn't say run by corrupt. They're businessmen. I mean,
politically, because they're not businessmen. That's exactly the point. No. So basically, this is like a fanatical political class in the West, and they declare we're gonna stop using natural gas, we're gonna stop using crude oil, we're gonna go all to solar and wind. Whatever, what's so-called renewables, right? So they see it as existential threat to Russia, right? As well. And the same, like, look at the Persian Gulf. They all now hate West. They totally alienated from the West. If let's say this World War III breaks out, it's essentially West against the rest of the world. The world wants to kill the West the way it exists right now. It basically hates the West. It's basically the world views West right now as existential threat to existence of the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is, let's say, 85% of the world.
And you're saying that that exists strictly because of oil and gas?
No, because the way it's viewed, and we can go into that discussion. The way it's viewed in the rest of the world, not in the West, they view it is this is new attempt at neo-colonialism. Like the West ran out of options how to extract value from the rest of the world, resources. And so this whole green policy is being viewed as neo-colonialism, where basically the West is trying to say, you know what, we're going to put fines on you, this carbon credits. It's essentially like a taxation on the rest of the world for the benefit of the West. Do you see what I mean? And that's how it's viewed. That basically through the legal system, through whatever you call it, I don't know, the international agreements, the West is trying to extract, value, what's been doing in the past. And there is very bitter memories of that around the world, what West did. And this is not being discussed, but there is also a nasty part of the West.
And we produce the majority of the world's oil.
What?
We produce the majority of the world's oil. We just don't produce it cheaply. We certainly refine the vast majority.
No. What I'm saying is, I'm saying West. I'm not saying just US, right? There's a whole group, right? That's the first thing. Because
you're also saying Europe as well.
Because Europe. It's in the same boat. The same policy being done by Europe and coordinated by US. Let's say Canada, Australia, Europe, that Japan there in that boat.
So specific to the Paris Accords. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay,
you're
talking about climate.
And so this is, and that's where Russians push this in the rest of the. That's why India is so. Usually it's a worst enemy of China, and they basically silently sort of like they don't clash. They stop clashing between themselves. They silently, India just like kind of like neutrally supports all this. Brazil, the same. Like Persian Gulf, look at that. Everywhere around the world, basically what the rest of the world is seeing, we finally started developing, and yes, we're using coal, whatever, using that stuff, but we see our standard of living going up. It's uneven. It's probably, you can say many things about it, but as a whole, it goes up.
Sure. Certainly China has, absolutely. India has, no doubt.
And because of that, West wants these resources to themselves because there's simply not enough resources for everybody to have the life of the West. Do you understand? Like, there's not enough resources. And if everybody starts to live like a West, from their perspective, the resources will be gone in whatever, like 5 years, let's say. And so they see this as approach, like, okay, and we finally starting living that way. We don't want to give it up. And the West trying to do this to us through all of this, green energy, whatever, alternative energy stuff. And so they absolutely, they're not vocal about it yet, but that's what's really happening behind the scenes. That's what really is going on. And Russia wants to seize the moment. So let me finish. And Russia sees that, and it's in the boat, in that the same boat, because Russia, in the international scene, Russia has never been viewed as empires that extracted as from the people outside of Russia. They don't understand like inside of Russia, but otherwise Russia is always being supporter of the developing nations, especially during Soviet time, and the fighter for those. And then so basically Russia sees this existential threat. China wants its own thing, bigger piece of the pie, and they basically creating this whole big world alliance of developing nations against the West, and that's very simple there.
So then this push towards energy independence, this push towards the ability to take care of oneself from an energy perspective.
But that
that's about pipelines.
That's not the push for the energy independence. That's a whole problem. If it were push for energy independence, everybody would say, "Good luck to you, no problem. We wish you all the best. So we're happy." The problem is it's not actually push for internet, and this is I totally agree with that view, and that's a part of the problem of this whole situation. This is a push to basically put the bondage on the rest of the world. So all of this Paris Accords, all of this system where you're going to be basically shipping money to the West, because West is so-called green, doesn't produce anything, and you sort of call dirty, so you have to pay money to West. And this is the whole scheme, how it's being viewed. And that's why it's called neo-colonialism. And people, nobody, look, I'll tell you this, in this way, this is right, and it will never fly and will never work. The first thing, the West will be completely annihilated and destroyed. And honestly, if it tries to do that, and for good reason. Because nobody will be destroying their quality of their life, especially if they were living in misery for all of the past and they finally see the sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. Nobody will give it up. They will fight tooth and nail against the West, against this kind of stuff.
Right.
I agree partially, but the main thing that I wanted to say to you is that probably like in mid and long term, like the West strategy was aggressive, but also let's say that I disagree that Chinese and Indians are in let's say agreement internationally, because I think that also they took the momentum to buy discount commodities from Russia, because we are not buying from them. They are not like making peace between them, because they are constantly like in fight for the control, for example, of the zones of Bhutan, of Nepal, of sphere of interest, for example, of the parts that is Muslim, like the Uyghur regions.
Yeah.
And but if I can put my last point about oil and gas, and then we move to the question, like to make the last 10-15 minutes. The main problem that I see, it's something that I'm telling every time. If we take a look to the Russian GDP, it's mainly based by 40% of their GDP is oil and gas. Export,
right,
and 70% of oil and gas export was to Europe. Right. So let's say that tomorrow the oil and gas export to Europe is cut to zero. Now the import of European Union of gas from Russia, it's only 10% of our consumption. And if I can tell you the data from Italy, that it's interesting, because Italy was importing 40% of the gas from Russia. Now it's, for the first time from 1974, is 0%. The problem that I see in the short term is this one, that before, let's say, the import route of gas was, let's say, mainly from the north, Nord Stream, and like the Brotherhood and the Yamal pipelines. Let's say, if you can see, like the pipe is going through Ukraine and it's arriving in Slovakia, Austria, and Italy. Yep. The final destination is Italy. From Ukraine. From Tarvis, after Austria, in the last 2 weeks, we bought zero gas. It's not closed from Russia. We are not buying. But what is changing in the routes? Actually, like our storage, it's about 100%. I think that the global climate helped a lot, like I think Europe, about this winter and the gas storage, because it was very hot also in October. So we didn't use heating system, especially like Southern Europe. But if you check like what is changing a little bit in the routes, is that we are improving a lot the routes between Algeria and Italy, also through Sardinia. Plus the other thing is it's the doubling of the TAP, the Trans-Anatolian Natural Pipelines from Azerbaijan. Plus, I think that the main problem of these planets, that, for example, Italy, it's now becoming the hub of the gas import from Northern Africa to Europe. It's not. It was the opposite before. It was Germany. It was the hub from Russia to the Southern Europe. And another interesting thing is, in the south of Cyprus, they found the biggest gas field ever discovered in the last 20 years. And it's in a border that it's interesting because it's Cyprus, Israel, Turkey, and and Egypt. They immediately found a deal to export to the West.
Right.
Now from LNG because it's too expensive to make a pipeline. But for me, let's say also we're increasing the pipeline from Norway. Finish a pipeline that connect Norway, Denmark, and Poland to completely cut off like the export to Russia, so from Russia to Poland. And LNG, this is another thing that we never used before. And now, for example, in Italy, we have a lot of, sorry.
You muted.
You muted yourself.
I know. I muted for purpose. The main thing is that if you check like the alternative for Russia, it's, let's say, Russia will not export to Europe nothing because for political reason, as you said, we will cut you off and we will make the biggest damage that we can for this thing. I think that it's like a suicide position. Because if you want to export from Russia to East, first, there is only one pipeline. We're constructing the new pipeline to China, but it will take minimum to 2028. If you cut off 30% of your GDP, how can a Russian Federation can exist in 4 years? I mean, it's or you cut completely all the internal services and governative services of the federation, or I don't know. This is like, for example, also now they are doubling the export to China. Let's say that is 30 billion cubic meters. Europe was importing 155. So it's number that doesn't matches to like.
I think in 100 years you're going to have revisionist historians or historians in general saying that Putin's greatest contribution to the world is his push for everybody else to accept energy independence as the norm. I think it's exactly what you're going to end up seeing. Is that people no longer having to be beholden on these pipelines and, quite frankly, who controls what to get to them to be able to take care of their own borders. And ultimately, that's really what it boils down to. As far as what long-term ramifications this war will end up happening on the rest of the world, because that is the one key thing I keep hearing is that you all keep mentioning the oil and how the oil, is deposited here, deposited there, and who controls the oil. And the fact that oil is what started this war from the oligarchs' perspective. Then ultimately, this has had a complete opposite effect of what they wanted, because now nobody wants to have anything to do with their oil or anybody's oil unless it's their own oil taking care of themselves or their own other alternative energy. Even in regards to the fact that you had mentioned the Middle East or you had mentioned the rest of the world. I hear what you're saying, but it sounds more like they're mad because we're adopting alternative energy and we're no longer going to buy their oil. Ergo, they're just not going to have anything to sell anymore, and they're going to have to find something else to sell.
Well, can I respond to all of them, because you kind of like sort of like agreeing kind of more or less, and I actually I would say that's actually concerning to me that you're taking everything so lightly. First of all,
no, not lightly.
That's one. Going back to China and India, I'm not saying they in agreement. So basically, you have 3 enemies, and 2 enemies. They see the third one as more biggest threat. So they not attack each other for right now. It's kind of like a silent agreement. We're going to be like not attacking, but we're going to attack the third one. That's all it is. I'm not saying they love each other. They hate each other passionately. But let's go back to this. All of your assumptions, what you're saying is based on the idea there is a plenty of resource. There's no plenty of resource. There's a shortage. The world lives in a shortage. And in a way, this whole situation is being possible in the first place because there is a shortage of cheap energy resource, which is meaning crude oil and natural gas. So all of this idea that like everybody's gonna drill their oil, no, there's very few places in the world where there's oil, first of all, right?
Obviously.
So it's concentrated. Unfortunately, for the rest of the world, that's the biggest problem of this sort of planet. It's very concentrated. So both of those, and so that's why we have this problem in the first place. So you cannot, the only way to be independent is really, nuclear. That's really the reliable way of and cheap. meaning because when we talk about this like wind, solar, it's insanely expensive. I can tell you this: in Ukraine, like in starting from like this time, it's pretty much no sun till about like all of the winter is like you almost never see the sun. It's gray and that's it. And you need like the field of like soccer field just to feed like couple houses. Like you know what I mean? Is like it's not possible, and wind is not there either. It's not realistic. First of all of that stuff, and second, you underestimate Russian population and how it was in a way bred over like past 1,000 years. That and I agree, there will be no 30% of GDP. I think it's already gone, even though Russian statistics showing it's like whatever, we lost like 10%, 8%, whatever they show, but it's all lie. They lost probably 30% by now, maybe 35, maybe approaching 40, I don't know, but somewhere in that ballpark. Russians will suck it up, they will fight as a population as a whole. There will be parts that like say like no, we don't want to do this, but the system is much stronger than you anticipate, and the system, the people in Russia understand where their interest is aligned with this system because they are not competitive. The only way for them to survive is to push, to sell this stuff to the world, and that's how they live. They don't produce Mercedes, BMWs. They don't produce Airbus things. And they all in a way it's like old Mongolian army. They live by looting. And so except this is like sort of it's modified right now. So they extract resource and they sell it. And so they all understand internally in their consciousness that they're fighting for their future as well. So
but how much of that is in an oligarch society, how much of that is actually matriculating down to the people itself?
Very little. You're absolutely right. Very little. But they also understand. And by the way, to be fair, Russian president was very clever, was very correct. The life of Russian citizen, and that's why he has such a huge support in Russia, went up tremendously during his time. Tremendously. Like not like living in Europe, but very close. And if you really want, you can live better than Europe if you really work hard. It's just there's a lot of problem at work ethic in Russia and all that stuff, alcoholism and all the fun things. But if you really want, you can live better than Europe. And so he has support. Don't delude yourself. People go and die not because because that's what they look. Will you go like for some BS and go and die somewhere right now? You will not. People go and die. Russians. I'm talking about Russian soldiers.
Sure.
They especially look at this Wagner mercenaries. There's like it's a picture of this World War I. There's like the tons of dead on the battlefield. There's almost like look at this All Quiet on the Western Front. Very close to that. Very close there, especially around the Bakhmut area.
Right, absolutely.
You go back into World War I essentially. And they go and they die day after day because this is what they believe. And you know what? These people, the most, screwed by the system, they are from the jail, right? You would think like,
absolutely.
what? They just the most screwed, they would just go, and some of they do, betray, and they jump to Ukrainian side. And there are very dishonest things done by Ukrainian government. It's horrible what they did. But most of them go and fight and die. And there was famous video. The guy from the jail, he was like wounded severely on the battlefield. So he was lying, and Ukrainian, like UAV flying around him and tried to finish him off. He actually took his AK and shot him himself.
Right. I saw that. It was a colonel or something like that.
There's total dedication for this. So thinking that's why Hitler lost the war. He was also saying it's a clay colossus on the clay whatever legs or whatever he was calling the Soviet Union, and in some ways yes, but the way the West approaches Russian people, it will be the hardest steel you can encounter. That actually, in many ways,
okay, so we've had that argument.
Than the West.
I can tell you that we've had that debate several times, and we've continued to say the same thing. Our argument has not been with the Russian people, even though there are those that are actually going to support it, and certainly, no doubt that those who are above 50 or above 60, 100%. But the vast majority, in our opinion, our assessment, I can tell you from Western ideology, is that those people that are under that age group are not really the issue. The issue has been Putin, the Kremlin, and the regime that's actually forcing this upon Ukrainian people. Now, what the rationale is behind it, that's the talk we've been having. But as far as the actual people, okay, great. We don't have an issue with the Russian people. We just got an issue with the leadership.
That's actually it's in a way very kind of like a how to say, putting your head in the sand and thinking everything is great. So if you go back to Germany in after World War II, the problem is in the system, in the educational system, in the cultural system. And if you like before, Germany was keep fighting. It stopped after World War II because educational, and it wasn't about Hitler. If not Hitler, there would be Schmittler. Who cares? There would be someone else, and they would be coming because it was basically German educational system, cultural. It was changed by the US actually,
and I saw it's the same in Japan,
and probably in Japan. I don't know enough. And for that part, actually, that's why the Eastern Germans hate the rest of and because there wasn't changed. It was kept the old sort of Nazi ideology that was just repainted into the Soviet one, but the idea remained the same. And so until you do something like that to the Russian population, there won't be change, because all of these new generations, they being brainwashed into the same belief. They may not be as aggressive as the older ones because they haven't seen that strength and everything, and they may not be as because like around the world, like newer generations, they less willing to die for anyone. They more sort of, individualistic because we had plenty of resources and they just want to enjoy the life, like just generally, like anywhere, like you go to Ukraine, US, Europe, anywhere, in China, I'm sure the same. Like younger ones are less inclined into the war in the first place everywhere, just like this just general trend. But don't confuse that trend with that idea that they still being brainwashed, that it doesn't just stick that well as it was sticking to like 50 60 years old when they were being raised and put through the system. So it's not that's not that simple. It's not that easy. The problem is very deeply rooted, and that's why we're all on collision course, and how this is gonna it may end up extremely horrifically for the entire planet. I'm not even saying like whatever. Ukraine is battlefield right now, defending itself, but like it's paid the price more than enough at this point of its own mistakes. But what I'm saying is the West hasn't paid, the China hasn't paid, the Russia truly hasn't paid, and this moment may come. For their own,
if I can if I can put like one question, because I received many questions in the public, but I don't want to make the stream.
Sorry, and I'm sorry I'm taking too much time. But
no, it's perfect.
I think it's very different opinion that's not like sort of prevailing in the West. And
no. It's what I wanted to say. It's only like I want to have an opinion by both, because yesterday we made a stream with Ken. Also about the war and whatever. If you have like one personal opinion of the actual situation in Ukraine, just to close the panel, and then I will give a conclusion to stay in the next 10 minutes and close. And what do you think that could be in let's say in a good way of seeing a form of compromise with two parts? Because I'm seeing that all the world, not only the West, is pushing to don't make this war as long as possible, because probably of the economy reasons, not because they take care about Ukrainians or
everybody. People in Ukraine understand it very well, that part.
Yeah, and so I think in your opinion, because you are from Ukraine, what could be let's say such a sort of a deal that is, let's say, applicable, really applicable to the reality? Don't let's say the Russian have to go out, return back before 2014, in your opinion? And what is
well,
like
I'm telling you, this is the problem is with, and this is like, you don't want me to say what it is, because it seems to you guys that this is so difficult and hard. What being realized in Ukraine is that Ukrainians are up against the wall, and there is nothing left for them but to die otherwise. Do you understand?
Okay, no, I wanted only to know. Let's say,
no, wait, I'm sorry.
Your personal opinion.
Is that your opinion that they are up against the wall and that they are prepared to die, or that they are going to die?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
This is all opinions. I'm not.
No. I'm sorry.
I'm not speaking for Ukrainian population.
No.
I'm not elected anywhere. But
no. I'm saying. Are you saying that's what you believe is occurring? That they are up against the wall. That they are, that they are basically facing the firing squad.
Yeah. That's a prevalent. I'm not saying like 100% of population.
No. I just was trying to understand.
But what really matters in these circumstances, only people who want to fight. And people who want to fight feel that way, that if we compromise with Russia, we die. Okay. Because they know lessons of this Poland partition. And I showed that before. There will be, they understand what's going to happen. They understand that Ukraine is just lucky right now that the West has to support Ukraine. Everybody in Ukraine understands that this is not out of the kindness of the heart. Everybody understands that it's like, West is forced to support Ukraine for its own preservation and survival. I
agree, but what could happen? Let's say that tomorrow one political condition pushed, let's say, Biden or whatever, with the Western leaders to force Zelensky to make a deal. Let's say from tomorrow we will not deliver any weapons anymore.
Yeah, I think Zelensky will not be there.
Okay.
It's just not. Yeah, that's what I'm saying before. You guys think it's a king. It's not. He is just basically free. It's like a parasite on the body, on the general body, that forms its own opinion, and he has to abide by the body. And he will not be. It's not the case where the tail wags the dog. It's actually the dog is really driving the thing, and the tail tries to pretend that this is just my own opinions and this is my voice. He's just, in this case, it actually works in a meaningful way, that it actually voices reality of the on the ground and the problem. And he really understands very well right now, to kill someone is so easy that he can literally get shot without even question.
And this is also what
if he does the wrong thing. So he's in a way between a rock and a hard place.
Okay, but as we talk also in the previous roundtable, also in April or whatever, in May, that maybe also to find a deal with the Russian, let's say that it's unacceptable for the Ukrainian population, could put Zelensky against his own forces. This is what I wanted to ask. Let's say that maybe I have extremist group. Let's say Azov or private sector, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah, that's gone from the scene. They don't even go with this Azov stuff. They wiped out. They were in the first place, never real force. No. I would respond to this. All of the Ukrainian population has become extremists because of this war. So how are you gonna change?
In what way? Extremist Ukrainians?
Are
they extremists about being Ukrainian?
Let me qualify, because maybe Russian propaganda will use it in a bad way. What it means is extremists that I'm not gonna come, that you're desperate, you're gonna fight till the end for your own self-defense. That's what I mean, extremists. I'm not talking about this Nazi bullshit. That's all.
No. I've never thought.
No. I agree. It's
Ukraine is so far from Nazi ideology as I'm from the moon. It's just not in DNA of Ukrainian people. They were never about dominating as a people.
I don't even know where that came from. That was just the Azovstal group. I mean, I guess I don't know. Anyway. I don't know where that even came from. Sorry, I digress. But I guess I am curious, because from a Western perspective, you postulate a couple different things, but you are Ukrainian, and is the idea that Ukrainians want to be their own country? Or are you saying that they are interested in some way, shape, or form maintaining some kind of satellite relationship with Russia?
No, I would say at this point, no satellite. No, I mean, like I'm saying, they're gonna fight, tooth and nail till die to not to against Russia. How can you think this is gonna be set? I don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like I want to
no
make sure I understood
satellite
because
relationship with Russia.
you had mentioned that there's obviously in the leadership cast that there's some kind of relationship maybe in the past with.
But that's
with
the leadership.
Russia.
That's not representing
Right. That's
the body of the nation. Do you understand?
Right. And I know you said that the tail doesn't wag a dog, and
Right.
I totally understand it. So you're saying fundamentally the average Ukrainian on the
Right.
street is completely opposed to any idea of being in any way, shape, or form beholden or in any to Russia. That's just
absolutely
gone.
Look, there was no light in Kiev, right? Like couple
Correct.
days, actually.
No,
yes.
today. Yeah.
Yes, but I'm saying like after that attack on 23rd, there was like the system is really basically collapsing,
Sure.
and there was no light for almost like 24 hours or something close to that, maybe a little bit longer. And then they turned on the light, and people were saying like Slava Ukraini. Like they're not saying like, hey, let's have a peace. And people shouting from their like apartments, like apartment buildings, and they like scream craziness like, screw right, like, all of that, like, all of the things. So this tells you that people, this is why I'm saying like when, allies were bombing Germany, and Germans worked harder actually. This does not work.
So you had mentioned the impetus being oil. You had mentioned the leadership being somewhat. You had mentioned the long-term training and almost brainwashing you of people. So where do you think the Ukrainians came up with this idea of wanting to be Ukrainians, separate and unto themselves and free to choose their own? Because it didn't come from the leadership, as far as what you said. It didn't come from, certainly didn't come from Russia. Where did it come from? Where did this?
It's cultural. Like when I would go, let's say, you feel difference culturally. Like it's foreign to you. Do you understand? It's foreign to you culturally. Like I would go when I was little. I would go to the Black Sea, to the to Crimea. Let's put it this way, and there would be from people from all kind of Soviet Union, and I would feel like I saw how the Russian parents treat their children, and how I'm being treated by my parents and as a Ukrainian children, and I see huge difference, and I didn't like it. I felt foreign to that, like foreign was those people. I would play with them, like build whatever castle, sandcastle, whatever, but there is a barrier. Like it's not how I want to live. Do you understand my life? Like I'm totally. It's like someone wants to make me somebody else, and I'm not gonna. I'm not even like I maybe like let's say I wanted to do that, but I'm not capable of living that way. It means my death.
That's interesting because it does kind of bring the entire conversation full circle, and the fact that you had said that Ukrainians existed as its own entity for a long, long time.
Yes, but it existed in sort of sleepy way, but basically was not represented by the actual national state. It was no leadership. It was always sort of shaved off, destroyed. But it kind of like existed as like a submarine, basically, right?
But the ideology.
And now the submarine is going up and rising above the water. And that's
which makes sense why you call the 23rd Independence Day. I see you. Those are some pretty valid points. Yeah, I have some disagreements regarding oil, regarding NATO, and all that. But I think those are very, very valid points. Yeah, absolutely.
So just to because
let's go back. I'll tell you this, and
okay, give me 1 second.
Sorry, this is actually a great conversation, Jules. I apologize.
No, but I'm saying you guys want peace at the expense of Ukraine, and it's not going to happen. How about
no? That I agree with you. But what just to close, like because to take the last 2 points, like one ping pong, you and Ken, and close the stream because it was very interesting, but it's already 2 hours. What is like your let's say not prediction, forecast of we already achieve your point of view that the Ukrainians are very proud and they can resist also if there is no electricity or whatever. So I was talking with 2 Ukrainian journalists that are actually in Italy, and the perception that I got was the same. like we will fight, we don't care, blah blah blah, like that the moral was very high. But on field, what could happen like in the next month, if there is let's say international pressure, the Europe and the West is still supporting economically and with weapons the Ukraine, but also Russia is not giving up and making, let's say, extra mobilization or whatever. What could be the scenario in your point of view? Both, and then we close.
So
Yeah,
scenario on my point of view, scenario on my point of view is definitely taking over the southern region of Ukraine, obviously, the Kidsburn, the Donbass. Again, the real question mark is Crimea. I think Crimea is going to be where people start asking, hard questions, which I don't know from a political standpoint whether or not Ukraine is going to want to answer or want to deal with that question mark. I think the rest of it is a foregone conclusion, but I do think Crimea may be a stopping point. So that's going to be the point of contention. That would be my guess. And over the winter, unless, of course, again, we talked about that black swan event. If something does happen, if Putin dies, maybe some kind of moderate comes into power. It could be that they just back off, but I'm not sure. I think at this point in time, let's say that, I'm so sorry. What is your name? I see war in Ukraine, but I don't know your actual name, and I apologize.
That's by design. There's no. I don't.
Oh, you don't have it.
I'm getting death threats.
Why don't you give me? And I totally. Hey, trust me. I got my own fan.
There's no need for extra exposure.
What would be the most common Ukrainian name, if you don't mind me saying that? I'm not trying to be.
Call it WIU.
Okay, so W. Oh, we'll call you W.
W. So, call me W.
W. So W. Because he had mentioned. Let's say at this point in time, the oligarchs have been so ratcheted down. They've had so many sanctions put against them. I think that any opening up of the oil or any type of money tap for them, freedom to be able to travel, I think they're willing to accept this point in time. So let's just say that they get a moderate in place. They're willing to go ahead and forego it. They're willing to say, look, we don't want to support this war. This war has been terribly bad. It's been horrible for business. So everything's fine. Still, the question mark is going to end up being Ukraine or Crimea, excuse me. I think that's where you're going to see the stoppage.
So now it's my turn. So
yes.
What would say this? I mean, you kind of asked specifically about next month, right? That's what was your question, because you didn't ask where the
next month. I hope next month, but I don't know.
Well, okay. I think there's just going to be bloodshedding for the next couple months. I don't think there will be any change in a meaningful way. At least I'm not seeing it immediately. Like maybe, exactly, could be another black swan, whatever, but not sort of like a base case scenario, just continuing bloodshedding. That's unfortunate. I don't see the end, like quick end to this thing. At least I'm not seeing till at least like February 1, for sure. And I would say even till March 1, I don't see it. And honestly, and that's the probability as we go further, then rises that somehow there's some kind of settlement. But I still see even like in the spring very little probability of any kind of settlement. So I think this is going to be very long drawn bloodshedding situation for both sides. And as I said before, the only way for Ukraine is territorial integrity. I think at this point, and it's. Before I was sort of more like the only one who was like, okay, we don't need NATO, we don't need EU, just make us sort of like, self-independent state. And this is more like being accepted by the sort of general population as a concession to Russia. And for me, it's actually, in my view, it's actually the greatest thing for Ukraine. And even I would say is even no need for any reparations, because they will actually corrupt Ukraine. They will do more harm than good for Ukraine.
So let me counter, because you're talking over the next couple of months, and I'm using history being a template here, that Ukraine has had multiple occasions where they've surprised everyone with their actions and their boldness. And I think personally, if you ask me, I believe 100% that they will take full advantage of the winter, of their superior technology, of their superior ability right now, and supplies and resources to take advantage of, quite frankly, a Russian army that's in disarray. I mean, there are a couple of strong points, but I think that's exactly what you're going to see. I think they're going to fundamentally use this winter because everybody's talking about how the battle lines are just going to, stiffen and not become mobile. And I think they're going to take full advantage of that and actually.
Well, I actually kind of will counter you. In my view, in my opinion, the Russia may launch large offensive in January. I'm not saying, I'm saying like it's for sure, like, like 80-90 probability percent scenario, but I would not be surprised if Russia will launch large offensive in January. They will continue, like, shooting rockets. They will get they realize that doesn't solve the problem, and they will come to conclusion we again need to pump our army, like in terms of number of the boots.
Well, they've already talked about that today.
No. But I'm saying, like, pumping it up. They declare 300. So I don't believe that. I think this is basically accordion. They just draw as they need, and they're gonna pump it up much more so that they have real, like, numerical, at least 1-to-1, which means like to bring it like to 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, and they will try to launch a large offensive. That's my sort of like, as I see how things develop, I will become more convinced of this. But this is something that I believe will become more realistic as we kind of go through. And probably January, if not January, maybe February, we'll see. But I think this is what may very well happen at that time frame, because there will be more Russians on the front line. The sort of military factories working at, as much as they could. They're buying everywhere. They're buying in Iran. They're buying in North Korea. Probably China may help. We'll see. But there's a big swamp thing with this Taiwan situation. So we'll see if that, then maybe China will be just like supplying nonstop. But generally speaking, Russia is capable of producing of sort of dumb weapons at huge amounts, like much more than the West.
True.
And that actually, I'm surprised that that's not really happening at this point, or they just started doing it. And then going to you, like, but oligarchs, all of those oligarchs who are pro-Western, they already fled the country. Right now, the biggest threat is actually the Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the head of Wagner. He is clearly trying to get into power and replace Putin.
Yeah, he would be the one I would.
If I had to, if you could tell me bet who's going to be next, I'm betting that's him.
Yeah, I agree
and
with you on that.
He is, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it this video or tomorrow. Tomorrow I will, I will show you like it's basically NKVD, reincarnation of NKVD. And that's why they perform sort of so well. Plus the willingness of the Russian people. This is not coming. It's going to be much. I would say this, that Putin is actually, people call him very bad, but he's not like, and I'm not saying he's great, but like he could have done many more worse things. He's more sort of normal and, in many ways, and actually he's more pro-Western than what you have behind him.
Right, and you understand.
We would be saying like, we wish we had Putin. Like when he's going to get replaced.
Let's go into the actual stratagem of the war itself. Okay, so let's just say he does worse, right? He uses bio, he uses chem. Okay,
I'm not saying that. Like, there's some more conventional stuff. Like, if that goes, then let's just like think that our planet still exists. I don't want to even discuss that, because that's just
you're talking about nuclear.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So you're presuming that Prigozhin is actually willing, like he would be willing to actually go ahead and.
I'm not saying he's willing. That's what I'm saying. That let's be happy that we have Putin, who's not.
Oh, because you're not okay. All right.
Because there are other people such as Prigozhin who wouldn't think twice pressing red button. Would not think twice, and they're not. He's not the only one. And this is what I'm saying. Misconception in the West, thinking that Putin is a terrible, and you just need to remove Putin, and there's like a like beautiful world under it. It's much more horrible black box under it. Like, you're gonna open and you're gonna be horrified what's under it. If I can, he is in many ways containing that horrific stuff because sometimes he's also like, oh, we have bad king, we need to replace with much more stronger king. He is not like I'm not saying like I like him or whatever. Like he did a lot of bad things, but let's be sort of, how to say, objective, about that stuff. And we will be surprised. Hopefully that never happens in the first place. I would say this. I'd rather have Putin than Prigozhin, or anybody who can replace him as other people there.
if I can conclude, like,
Sorry.
I suggest to everybody, there is a very interesting book to read that it's called The Labyrinth of Putin. It's old one, it's 2009 of Steve Levine. So it's very interesting that I agree with what you say. We are already talking with Ken about this, that like in a sort of way, because I studied also in Russia. I made a master in GIMO in 2016, so I went like to study their point of view about why they call coup d'état of Maidan and whatever, blah blah. And it's interesting that like historically Putin was, as you said at the beginning, very pro-Western, because it tried like in 1999 and in 2000 they tried also to make a little bit of flirting with NATO. Then NATO disagreed to let Russia enter, but so I send you a provocation to close. I hope that the war will end as soon as possible, because the people is living an horrible life, and living in the war, it's disaster. And I still let's say I'm still thinking that when the war will end, let's say that there is a chance to still have a trade between the European blocs and the Russian Federation in the next years. But for sure, what will change is the grade of dependency. Like to give you my point of Southern Europe or Germany, because Germany and Italy, it's like the producer of stuffs for Russia, if you think about it, also for the world, but it's 50% of the sole production of Europe, it's Germany and Italy. This is why we were so dependent by Russian Federation, because Germany was over 50% of the gas was from Russia, and Italy 40%. Now Italy importing 0% from Russian Federation. For sure, we have a huge cost of changing the things. But imagine if there is, let's say, a sort of peace treaty, and we can still import from Russia, but in a lower amount. For sure, not 40 or 50%. But I'm explaining this because what changed a lot, especially for Germany, is that their production lines was very cheap, because they are able to buy gas from Russia in a long-term contract that was not in the market prices. Italy also. The Italian people was paying the market price. But the Italian Gazprom, that it's called Eni, had a direct contract with Gazprom with a price that was made 20 years ago. So this was like the extra profit that the companies were making. The people were struggling, but the companies were making a lot of money in these 8 months. If you check like the energy company, for the energy companies was the best year in the last 20s, I think.
So that's already become a political football.
Yeah. So this is why, let's say, we need to dig a lot to find like who is giving the benefit of this situation. For sure, not the people, and for sure not like the Ukrainians. Or also, let me finish with this. I know a lot of Russian people. There is also the mood that it's like increasing a lot of the people that it's not supporting the war. I'm not saying it's not supporting the government. I'm saying that maybe before February 24, there was a lot of people that were supporting the government, as you said, the war in Ukraine, because from the 90s and after, for sure, the Putin government increased a lot the quality of life of the Russian. And I can prove it, because I went many times and I saw the difference, especially in the big cities. This is the main difference. If you go to Italy, countryside or the cities, the quality is high. In Russia, you know that if you go in the city or the evening, like, I don't know, in the countryside,
a different world in a way,
it's like Italy 70 years ago. So it's the difference. It's very big. If you go in Moscow, it's like to stay in New York.
But
It's the
that's
same
why
as Shanghai.
Moscow is 20 million people in Russia, because everybody lives from the sort of countryside that goes to Moscow, and it's kind of like
Yeah, but still, like it's 20 million on 150. So you have a lot of
no,
people.
I know, but no, well, obviously not everybody can join Moscow, so
because
there's a lot of
it's just
people who
expensive.
cannot.
So let's hope that all this mess can finish, and because like I think that the pressure also from China. I was talking with Ken before the live, like just to close. I have this friend that is Marocina. I will put the link also in the comments. That is reporting from Shenzhen. The society situation in China, it's completely explosive. We are not getting what is happening.
Right, and that's what I'm saying on my videos. I agree with you 100%.
No, it's like it's the first time in history of People Republic of China that there is massive riots on the streets. If you check for the public, if nobody saw this, and then I close completely. I saw this image that was shocking for me. Like not only Foxconn industries, but other industries are putting nets outside of the windows to prevent the suicides of the workers, because they are locking down the big factories, but factories of 50, 100,000 people, and not
Sure.
like so there you can check net Foxconn on Google, you will find it. It's something that also in TikTok there is a lot of videos about it. And or the Foxconn factory is full of waste. This is interesting because it's my field about waste management. The people, it's forced to don't go out from the factories because they still have to produce the iPhones or whatever for and the Chinese, for the first time, were getting crazy, making riots, and it's difficult to control the situation. So if the economy it's not growing, let's put this to destroy like the paradigm of the change of the buyers of the oil and gas. Also, India and China cannot increase the quantity of stuff that they can buy from the Russian Federation. So all the game it's broken. What we have, let's say, in a huge lack, in my opinion, it's diplomacy. I don't see the diplomacy. I'm seeing only war in battlefields, but not diplomacy from the parts. For sure, there is a sort of under the table treaty between US and Russian Federation. I'm sure 99%, for at least for the nuclear problems. But I don't know. I agree in what you say, war in Ukraine, and also can about the next month. But I still hope in a sort of let's say hope for peace. So let's see what will happen. So for everybody that put the question, I collected everything, and we will use them in the next roundtable. I wanted to make 1 hour and a half. We did 2 hours and a half. So
almost 2.5 hours
that way.
No, but it's so. It was a great company of you both for New World Econ and History Legends. They had some working problems, so they will be in the next roundtable in December. Also, Defense Politic Asia and WIB Union, they will join us. So thank you so much. Please, for you to stay 1 second. The war in Ukraine and News for TOF, the links are in the description. So join their channel. News for TOF is only on TikTok. War in Ukraine, you already know him, but it's on YouTube. So go and subscribe. Thank you both.
Just want to say that the handle is at WIU, exactly as if you want to find it, because there's a lot of war in Ukraine, you're going to have different kind of things. So I kind of try to make it so people can find it very easy. Sorry for doing it like kind of like this, not promotion.
No, but it's okay.
I want to clarify how to find it. You just at WIU, and that should get you on YouTube.
Anyway, in the description of the video there is the link, so there is no chance to make an error. So thank you so much. Have a good evening, a good day for Ken because it's morning, and see you next time. Ciao. Wait a sec. Ciao. Bye bye.